Hello! Today's lecture we're going to talk about one note, okay? And the reason I'm going to spend this whole lecture just talking about one note is because it's a little more complicated than the 3 notes we talked about in the previous lecture, okay? When you're looking at a whole note or half note or quarter note, it's pretty easy to count how long you're going to play those notes, okay? But it gets a little complicated when you're holding a note less than a beat, okay? So that's why I'm going to spend some time explaining the note that follows. Okay, so this note looks like a quarter note that we went over in our previous lecture. The only difference is that this note is going to have what's called a tail, okay? So it's fairly easy to see why this is called a tail. Like, it literally just looks like a tail. Like, it looks like a tail attached to a note, okay? So when you see this tail, you're going to know that what you're looking at is called an eighth note, okay? So what that means is that you're going to hold this note half of what you would hold a quarter note. So let's say we're looking at this time signature where a quarter note gets the beat. You're going to hold this note for half a beat, okay? Half a beat. So let me explain how to do that, okay? So the reason I showed you in the previous lecture counting the beats out like this, like 1 and 2 and 3, is because sometimes notes will be held for less than a beat, okay? Such as this one, half a beat, okay? So that's when you're really going to want to use this sort of system where you know that when your hand is going up, that's half a beat, okay? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So when you see an eighth note, basically you know you're going to hold the note for this amount of time, okay? Because if a beat is this, half a beat is going to be this, okay? So let's say so every time my hands clap, that's one beat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Every time I raise my hand, that's a half a beat. So an eighth note, you're basically holding the note this long, okay? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. So let me just count it and show you on the harp. 1 and. See how it's half a beat? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, 7, etc. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2. So basically, this half a beat. So if you look at this as a whole beat, half a beat, all right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. Okay, so you're basically holding the note until the and. 1 and 2 and 3. So if you think of a quarter note as one beat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, the same amount of time with an eighth note, which is half a beat, you're gonna have 8 notes, okay? So it's gonna be like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You see the difference? Because an eighth note is always going to be half the amount of time as a quarter note, whether whatever time signature it's in. Okay, so say we see a quarter note, we know to hold it 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. An eighth note is going to have twice as many notes in that same amount of time because it's going to be held for half the amount of time. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's do it on a different note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So the important thing to remember, when you see an eighth note, it's held for half the amount of quarter note. We're looking at a time signature where quarter note gets the beat, which is going to be most time signatures, especially when you're first starting out. So it's what will really help you is to sort of use this system of counting beats where you're counting the half. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So imagine the quarter notes being plucked every time I clap my hands together, right? Because that's one beat. Okay, so an eighth note, since it's half a beat, is going to be plucked every time my hand reaches up here. Because if this is one beat, 1, half a beat is going to be that. Okay, so let's do it one more time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So the most important thing to remember when you see an eighth note, especially at first, obviously you can't use your hands because your hands are going to be playing the harp, but it's okay to tap your foot. You know, every time your foot is up, it's and, okay? If you have a desire to play in an orchestra or something like that, obviously, like, tapping your foot is not something, you know, they really encourage. It's not something you do in an orchestra, but what it is, it's good to use that to start, and then eventually you just sort of internalize it. You just, in your head, you're always thinking 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So eventually you don't have to use your foot to mark the time, but you're still thinking 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay? So I will go a little more into depth with this. I hope it was clear. If not, feel free to email me. I will try to clarify it even further, but I hope that gave you a pretty good understanding of how to count the eighth note, okay? Because that is another note you're going to see almost all music. You're going to come across this. This is a very, very, very common note to come across, okay? So I want to show you, just introduce you to the concept, okay? So remember, when you're counting beats, use this method, okay? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And the reason you do this is because some notes have less than a beat, so you're going to want to really know how to hold a note this long, okay? 1 and 2. All right, so I hope this was able to explain the eighth note. I know, especially when you're first starting out, it's a little confusing to sort of get this concept, but keep practicing. You know, write this down. You know, write this information down, and then just play around with it on the harp, okay, until you really get a really good idea of how long to hold this, okay? Another thing you can do is set your metronome, which I will go into more detail later as well, to a beat, and just make sure that by the time you play 2 eighth notes, it's going to be the same amount of time as it takes for the metronome to click one beat, okay, just to make sure that you're sort of on time, okay? I will go into much more detail later how to use a metronome, but that is also a good way to sort of make sure that you are giving the notes the correct timing. All right, well, I will see you next lecture, and keep practicing.